and if it seems useful, she'll pose them. Okay, let's get going. This is the agenda. And I'd first of all just like to point out some similarities and differences searching for adverse events on Embase and MEDLINE. And I'd like to spend just a little time on the definitions because this forms the basis of a good understanding of what we're talking about. First of all, I'd like to focus on the adverse drug reactions in Embase. And there's a definition here of the M-tree scope note for adverse drug reaction, and adverse effects on MESH, on MEDLINE, which are defined here. And these definitions are not identical. The main difference is that the focus on adverse drug reactions in Embase is on humans, as you can see here. For animal studies, drug toxicity is typically used. The inclusion of adverse effects, and on MEDLINE, adverse effects includes also procedures, as you can see here. Also, when you search on MEDLINE, using the adverse effects subheading, which is here, you actually include poisoning and toxicity, which are excluded from the Embase adverse effects subheading. So when making a comparison, I deliberately am excluding here the toxicity and the poisoning subheading. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Before I do, let's just step outside of MEDLINE and Embase for a moment to look at some data from the FDA. As you can see, the last 10 years have seen a 2 or even 3-fold increase in the number of adverse drug reactions reported to the FDA, with a peak of 80,000 in the most recent year that was reported in this overview. Now, if we come back to Embase and MEDLINE, what I show here are data using the search strategies which I presented a couple of slides ago. This is the search strategy which is used for Embase. And you can see that what I have done is I've looked for all chemicals and drugs, exploded, and then limited to adverse reactions. I'll be showing you this live in just a few seconds. And when you, excuse me, when you do that, you will see that the number of adverse reactions on Embase has grown since 1988, when we first introduced adverse reactions subheadings on Embase, through to the present day, and we're currently running at about 45,000 adverse reaction records every year. And compared that with MEDLINE, which is running about 1/3 less, at 30,000 a year. Just trying to move to the next slide. Okay. What I'd like now to do is to zoom in to how adverse drug reactions are indexed on Embase and how you can search them. And to do that, I'm actually going to go into Embase. And I'm going to do a search. In fact, I'm going to open M-tree. And I will actually browse by facet with chemicals and drugs. And if you open up the chemicals and drugs facet in M-tree, you can see that there are about 15 million records here. I could delve down to specific topics within M-tree and specific drugs, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm just going to focus on the top level. And I'm going to take this query to drug search. When I do that, you can see that a number of options open up. And one of them is to add a drug subheading. You can add multiple drug subheadings to, in this case, chemicals and drugs. I'm just going to select adverse drug reaction and then search on that. And you can see you get something in excess of 800,000 hits. Now, to get an idea of the drugs indexed in these records, you just have to open up the drug filter here on the left-hand side. And you'll see the most common drug is placebo, indicating the preponderance of controlled trials in this data set. The second place is the term unclassified drug. This is indexed whenever a new drug or candidate term that is not yet in entry is indexed. And these can also be linked to the subheading adverse effect. But for now, I'd like to zoom into, I'll just show you down here. And there should be the term cisplatin here, yes. So if I just click on there and then select filter, then I'm looking specifically at the adverse drug reactions to the drug cisplatin. And you can see that there are some 34,000, in fact I don't want to do it in this way. What I wanted to do, so I'm going to edit the search. I actually wanted to show you the specifically the adverse reactions. That's what I wanted to show you. So here I have essentially repeated the adverse reaction search which I carried out in number 2 for chemicals and drugs, and I've done that specifically for cisplatin. I edited that search just now because what I had shown you was all the records on cisplatin in the database. I didn't want to show you that, just for this example. Now, a nice trick is to open up the disease filter. And when you do that, you can see quite a few cancer terms. You can see here, for example, advanced cancer and ovary cancer. And these are most likely the diseases which have been treated by cisplatin in these articles. But the other terms, many of the other terms, are very likely the adverse reactions, because after all, we've done a search which is specific for the adverse reactions against cisplatin. You can see, for example, nausea, neutropenia, vomiting, and so on. What I'd like to do is filter on anorexia. I'm just going to click on that one. And what I'd like to show you, let's just open up this first record here. If you look at the indexing of this first record, you'll see that anorexia has been indexed as a disease term. If you hover over here with the mouse, you'll see it's indexed with the key subheading side effect and specifically linked to both cisplatin and another drug, paclitaxel. You can look at this the other way around. Here is cisplatin that we started with, and that is linked to adverse drug reaction as a key subheading, and you can see a listing of all of the side effects which are listed for cisplatin in this article. I'm going to jump back into the main presentation now. going to go to slide 15, because I wanted to show you also how this search compares to MEDLINE. As you can see here, there are 22,000 adverse reactions to cisplatin, which we just had a look at. And if you compare the same search on PubMed, which is here, the result that you get is less than half of that. This is partly due to the unique journal coverage of Embase, but partly also to the fact that in Embase the drugs are indexed in depth with all of the adverse drug reactions listed. Now you may be wondering what we do about the articles which refer to drugs toxicity and which you recall were included in the MEDLINE searches of adverse effects. On Embase, we also have a subheading for drug toxicity. So I have drug toxicity here. And this is defined by a scope note at the bottom. And the key difference is that drug toxicity on Embase is used for studies which are carried out at non-therapeutic doses, as you can see here, which usually means that they're carried out in animals or sometimes in vitro. Now, if you search for references on drug toxicity, so I've prepared a search in advance here, you can see that there are about half as many toxicity studies as adverse reactions. So for chemicals and drugs, this is the total number of adverse reactions in Embase. That's what we did before. And this number, 440,000, is the total number of references which are picked up with the drug toxicity subheading. So this is the code which is pulled up automatically when you do the drug search, as we did at the beginning of the presentation for adverse effects. And you can see that in the case of, well, before I say that, in search number 3 here, you can see that most of these toxicity studies are not covered within the adverse reactions. They're additional results. Now, if we do the same thing with cisplatin, so that's numbers 4, 5, and 6, you can see that for cisplatin, there are only about 20% toxicity studies compared with the adverse reaction studies. And again, most of these toxicity studies are unique in the sense that they are just about toxicity and not about adverse effects. And finally, I should mention that there are 2 other ways in which you can search adverse drug reactions using Emtree. First of all, by searching here using the LNK field label. So if you type in adverse drug reaction and then limit that to LNK, what you are picking up is all of the records which have the adverse drug reaction link. You can see that the total retrieval is rather different, a little bit more than what we had retrieved when we had limited chemicals and drugs to adverse effects. And the other way that you can search is on this line here, search number 3, is you can look at adverse drug reaction directly in Emtree and then explode it. And you find that there are some 364,000 hits. And many of those are unique. In other words, they were not covered by the first 2 searches. So the value of the exploded Emtree term, which delivers many unique records in this set here, is very clear. And the reason why we filed so many of those unique records, you can see if you open up the publication type, you see that very many of these are conference abstracts and, for example, also articles in press. So this second record here is a conference abstract, and the third record here is an in-process record. And these two types of record, the conference records, the conference abstract and the in-process records, together with the articles in press, they are indexed automatically. They're not indexed manually, and for that reason, they don't have the subheading. They cannot be indexed with the subheading adverse drug reaction, which is only indexed manually. For that reason, indexing them or retrieving them with the specific adverse drug reaction terminology is a way to retrieve these records uniquely. Okay. What I'd like to do in a second, but I'll first of all ask Anne-Marie if there are any questions which she'd like me to answer, is I'd like to look at searching for adverse reaction from the other side, looking at it from the point of view of side effects.
Sure, and we just had one comment, Ian, on the audio, so we'll just be, just to the audience, if it is cutting in and out for you, we'll be extra careful to make sure that we stay close to the mic, so hopefully that will solve any interference in the audio. And Ian, understandably, a couple of questions around MEDLINE in Embase. So you did mention, of course, that MEDLINE is covered also, and you mentioned that the difference between the adverse reactions. So we had one comment saying it seems like there should be more in MEDLINE since it includes poisoning and toxicity. So I think this is referring back to your initial slide on the definition. So the definition for adverse reaction included poisoning and toxicity.
Yeah, but in fact there are less results.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, I think that's what this, person is referring to.
Yeah. Well, as I think I may have mentioned, one of the reasons is the extensive coverage of Embase, the fact that we cover in total more than 8,000 journals, and they include all of the MEDLINE journals, but they include also around about 2,500 journals which are unique to Embase, and many of those journals we have added to Embase because of their focus on the drug and disease literature. And many of these journals will also be producing articles which we indexed with adverse drug reactions. The other reason is that in some articles we index the article in depth to the extent that we will be identifying adverse drug reactions where MEDLINE may not be. So that can also contribute to a higher level of indexing with Embase, even when you throw in the MEDLINE poisoning and toxicity articles.
Sure, thanks, Ian. And I think a good question and a good time to do this now before we move on. Someone said they're not clear with the DD-AE and DD-TO, so maybe just a minute.
I'll just have a look at that once again. So if we go to the drug search here, indeed it's a little bit mysterious, these codes. Once you know them, but if you don't know them, it may be a bit difficult to remember. If we just go, we type in any drug name here, so let's, for example, do aspirin, and let's do the toxicity. We've got drug toxicity here, and if we select aspirin, linked to drug toxicity, and then do search, then you will see that the DD-TO code comes up here automatically. Now you don't have to do it via the drug search. You can actually go into this and you can actually copy it back to drug search, and then you can say, well, I don't want to do that one. We'll just delete that, Actually, we wanted, for example, clinical trial. Or you can edit this line, and then if you know the codes, because you've used them a few times, then we can type in the TO here. And then you can accept those. So it's very easy to modify existing searches, or to use existing searches using the copy to advanced search as here, or the copy to drug search as here, to use those as a template for new searches.
Yeah, sounds good. We do have a question on, is the process the same for devices? But I guess we're
coming to devices at the end. It's a little bit different.
That is coming up. And maybe just one more question before we move on. So there is a question on what is meant by adverse event link. So I think that's the LNK.
Okay.
Maybe that wasn't entirely clear.
Not entirely clear. Okay, let me actually type it in again. We'll do it for something else. So I'll just do copy, and then actually I'm going to do drug toxicity. Now we can type in the name of any of the subheadings, any of the subheadings which are listed here, and then we can put in the three-letter field label LNK. I'll first of all do that. And this shows all of the records which are indexed with a drug toxicity link. If we look at one of them, and we look at the drug terms, then we don't know in advance which one it is, but here was one, antidepressant agent, which is linked to the drug subheading drug toxicity. And if you want to know where this is described, you can have a look in the help file. And in the help file, if you look under search hints, and you look at fields and field abbreviations, here it is. The LNK is a free-floating subheading on Embase, and there's an example of adverse reaction, drug reaction, which is given here. I'll just close that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have a couple. There's quite a lot of questions in, so we should definitely make some time for more at the end. So a very typical question, I think, one around how do you search for subheadings before 1988, and a couple of specifics. But we'll come back to those and cover as many of them at the end as we can.
Okay.
Yeah?
Hold on to that.
I'll hold on to that thought.
Okay. So let's go back into the presentation, and I'll try to go through a little bit quickly so that we have time for the questions. We're looking at side effects. If you look at side effects on M-Tray, here is the scope node. It's more or less the same as adverse drug reaction, except the other way around. In this case, it's a subheading for diseases. And again, it's used at therapeutic dose ranges in humans. And you can again find it in M-Tree. Here it is. There are this number of records which have been indexed with the term side effect. As I mentioned before, this is different from using the subheading itself, because this is the M-Tree term. You might want to return to that. And there are about 100 specific, more generic side effector terms which are listed here. One of them, which I thought was quite interesting to draw your attention to, is this term, which is the absence of side effects. You see it's listed as a narrower term of both adverse drug reaction and side effect. And this can be useful if you're looking specifically for that particular topic. You're interested in articles which are looking for side effects, but where none were found. Now, if you're looking for side effects as a link term, you can do it in a corresponding way, in a similar way to the way that we did with adverse drug reaction, except in this case, you use the disease name disease. This is at the top of the hierarchy, or you can look at specific disease terms. So I've chosen the term which is at the top of the disease hierarchy, I've linked it to here to side effect in the disease search. And the results that you get, in this case the code is another one that you probably will not be immediately familiar with, but after using it for a little while you'll be able to type this in directly if you need it, is DM_SI. The SI is the side effect. And when you open up the disease filter for this record, there are 6,600 records roughly altogether in Embase. You can pull up a list of disease terms down here, which, as you can see, to a large extent are the side effects, such as nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. But there are a few of the more commonly occurring diseases which are actually indexed with side effects. So here is most likely one of them, breast cancer. And I've already shown you this slide in effect. If you look for the disease term anorexia, it's linked to side effect, and that corresponds with cisplatin, which is linked to anorexia. Okay, now I'm very well aware that many of you use keywords as well as entry terms to identify adverse drug reactions. So for that reason, I'd like to just make a few suggestions and mention one or two of the pitfalls of keyword searching. The most important point, of course, is that although you can increase the sensitivity of your retrieval using keywords, this can be at the cost of a significant loss of precision. So in this example, the adverse reaction, well, first of all, let me just show you what I've done. In search number 3, I've used the keyword adverse in order to try and pick up adverse reactions against cisplatin. And in searches number 1 and 2, I've looked at ways of doing this using either the subheading link, or in this case, exploding the entry term adverse drug reaction. And in the final search, number 4, I've excluded these first two searches from the third one. So I'm looking here in number 4 only at articles which specifically mention the word adverse and are not already indexed with subheadings or with index terms. And you can see that there is a fairly large number of these articles. Now, I've just opened up here the first one of these, and you can see that in this article, cisplatin is indexed with some subheadings, but the subheadings are drug combination and drug therapy, not side effects. And in fact, the side effects, the adverse drug reactions, are against a different drug in this article, bevacizumab. And this shows one of the dangers of using keyword searching. You can pick up these false correlations, which you can avoid if you use the subheadings. If you're aware of this, it can be useful. You may find some additional articles, and I'll show you in just a few slides some cases where that can indeed be useful. First of all, let's just have a look at some of the keywords which you might use. Now, this is a list of keywords which we have put together over some time. It's just a representative list. It's certainly not complete, and any individual user would want to make their own list of terms. But for example, there is a group of keywords at the top which indicate that adverse drug reactions may be identified in a particular article. There's another group of terms which indicate that adverse drug reactions may be discussed in an article. Here are some keywords which are related in some way, but not necessarily always to drugs. And at the bottom, I've put a couple of keywords which indicate adverse drug reactions when they're used in proximity to other keywords. So, for example, in the case of effects, if the article talks about undesirable effects or lack of effects, then these might be an indication of adverse drug reactions. And I'd just like to actually show you this directly. I'm not going to do all of this, but what I shall do so I'm going to just type in cisplatin and turn off extensive search. And what I've done is I've saved as hedges or pre-saved search in my email alerts folder. I've saved these groups I just showed you in 4 different searches. The first one is called adverse hedge number 1. If I simply rerun that, and you can see it coming up in just a second. And here is this group of terms which I showed you just now in the top part of the presentation. A bunch of terms which are indicators of adverse effects, and you can combine those two, and you have a nice keyword search for adverse reactions on cisplatin. There are 81,000 in this particular case. And if I return now to the presentation, you can see that that particular search I just showed you, with number 4, I've done the same thing for the other pre-saved searches in 5, 6, and 7. And in number 8, I've looked at cisplatin now as an index term, which is combined with all of those keywords. And I've looked to see in number 9 which of them are unique. In other words, they were not found in the searches that I've begun with, which are the subheading search and the adverse drug reaction search. There were 53,000 odd. And then to make it a little bit easier to show what's going on, I've just limited those in search number 10 to the ones which have cisplatin in the title. And if we look at those, we can see the first 2 articles. Well, first of all, under the publication type, you can see, as we've seen also before, there are conference abstracts and articles in press. And the first article is an in-process record, so there's no subheadings being indexed here. And the second article actually is not a conference abstract. It is a record which has been fully indexed. It's on both Embase and MEDLINE. I've had a look at this article, and actually this particular article is outside the definition of adverse effects on both Embase and MEDLINE. I've looked at both Embase and MEDLINE for this, because although cisplatin has induced something which looks like an adverse reaction, in fact this is a technique which has been used in a physiological study. And we don't index adverse reaction in those kinds of situations. If you remember, adverse drug reactions only indexed for human studies, not for human cells, but for studies with humans. So what I've been trying to show you here is that keyword searching can be extremely useful for enhancing your results when you're looking for adverse drug reactions, but you have to be aware that they may pull up records which you decide are not actually what you're looking for, false drops. And finally, as you mentioned, I want to move on quickly to devices. If you look at the some information which has been prepared by the FDA, this is a little while ago now, you can see that the growth in adverse reactions against devices in the period 2004 to 2008 has exceeded that shown for drugs here, to the extent that there are even more adverse reactions against devices. So how can you search for these kinds of adverse reactions on Embase? Well, we've done a couple of things on Embase. One thing that we've done is we spent the last year or so revamping the hierarchical structure of the medical device tree within Embase. And you can see here, within this tree, there are many different categories of devices. Each of these categories lists more than 100 terms. There are more than 3,000 terms listed here altogether. That's a growth from less than 1,000 a year or so ago. And altogether, we have indexed 1,700,000 records using these terms. That's, I think, 6% of the entire content of Embase from 1947 to the present time, and in the current years it's about 10% of the entire database. Now, if you want to index, if you want to look for adverse events for medical devices, what you can't do is you can't use a subheading, because we don't have a subheading. We're looking at the possibility, and we think we will be able in the course of next year to add a subheading adverse effects for medical devices. But at the present time, you can't do that. What you can do is you can make use of another subheading, and that's the subheading complication. And as you can see from the definition, this subheading is used for disorders or symptoms which arise as a complication of a pre-existing disease or medical procedure other than drug treatment. Let's see how that works in practice. So in this example, I show an explosion search of medical device. So that picks up the 1.7 million articles in the whole of Embase, which I mentioned just now. If we go into disease search and look for the disease subheading complication, so I've shown you how to do that already, and this is what you end up with. You can see there's 1.5 million records, and you combine these two together and you get 200,000 records. And if you look at the growth over time, that corresponds to around about 15,000 records a year. Now you can, of course, use the same set of keywords as we did for the adverse drug reactions. Probably if you're searching for devices, you would want to modify these keywords somewhat. But nevertheless, if you do that, you will end up with a number of adverse reactions or possible adverse reactions in the final set, which you where you might find some adverse reactions against medical devices, which are not shown by the first search that we carried out. And here's an example of one of these articles. You can see that the particular device which has been indexed here is intrauterine contraceptive device. You can see here is the keyword which we've picked up. Actually, this keyword has also been indexed. But if you look, there are no subheadings here, and not even the subheading complication. Now, you might think, well, perhaps the subheading complication should have been indexed for side effect or for pelvic pain. Well, normally speaking, that would be the case, but this record actually is a conference abstract. And as we've seen before, conference abstracts together with in-process articles and articles in press are not indexed manually. They're only indexed automatically, and we don't index subheadings for such articles. And this is a great way, therefore, to find these kinds of articles. So that concludes the main part of the presentation. What I've done is I've talked about adverse reactions, I've talked about medical devices, and finally we've talked about using keyword searches for both adverse drug reaction, both drugs and medical devices. And I've shown you very briefly that it's possible to save lists of keywords as Embase as email alerts or as saved searches. So thank you very much for listening, and Emma, I'd like to pass back to you.
Yeah, we've got just a couple of minutes for questions. Hopefully we can maybe try and squeeze in maybe 2 questions, Ian. And maybe we come back to the question on searching for adverse events before 1988.
Okay.
Just very quickly, if we can. While Ian is setting up here again, I would like to say that there have been a lot of great questions today. We won't get to all of them, but we will answer all of them and distribute to you. So please, if you've still got some questions that you're dying to ask, then just keep entering them. We'll collect them all, answer them, and send them back to you.
Okay. So I'm just doing a search on the adverse drug reaction link. As we saw before, there's a million of those. If we have a look at the publication year, and we can see there are, before 1988, there are quite a few of these adverse drug reactions. And what these are the articles which have actually been indexed by MEDLINE. And we have, and I'll just demonstrate that to you. If I just edit this, and I pick up specifically from 1947 to 1986, just edit that, test. You can see all in all 144,000 of those. Edit that, and I'll show you. We limit those to, you can see 143,000 of those 144,000 actually are derived from MEDLINE and not from Embase. So what we have done, we've taken those MEDLINE articles from the National Library of Medicine. In that earlier time period, there were quite a few MEDLINE unique articles, and we have converted their indexing into the Embase format, and if they had indexed an article with adverse effect, and we have translated that into adverse drug reaction. So that's one way that you could do it, and the other way, of course, is what we have shown here with search number 9. You can use keywords, and that would then pick up the articles which have been indexed specifically by Embase.
Yeah. Maybe just very quickly to go to entry in, and we had one question. Can we also specify our search on a drug group or region? So I guess it would be something like cisplatin if we could search for a group of drugs, which indeed we can.
Yes.
And then maybe you can just quickly show how they could find that.
Well, if you go in with any specific drug, you can very quickly see which category it belongs to. Cisplatin is an anti-neoplastic agent. So you can zoom up and down. We can have a look at, for example, cardiovascular agents. And within that, you can find hypertensive agents. If you know a particular compound, you're not sure what it is, for example, aspirin. First of all, aspirin has a preferred term, acetyl salicylic acid, and then you can see that's identified in many different ways within EMTRI. It's a particular kind of enzyme inhibitor. It's also an anti-inflammatory agent. It's an analgesic agent. Here is one of the trees on chemical structure. So you can decide which of these that you want, and if you decide, for example, that you're interested in the last one, antithrombocytic agents, we can come there. And in this way, you can navigate around EMTRI and pick up the exact group that you want. And having done that, you can either click directly on the records in order to search them, or as we saw before, you can take the query to drug search, and then we can say antithrombocytic agents. Let's have a look at the adverse drug reactions, etc., and go further in that way.
Super, super. So, like I said, we haven't covered all your questions. There are some great questions in here, a bit more on have all the mesh headings been mapped to entry, looking for specific target searches. Someone mentioned vaccines. So we'll go through all of those questions, Ian.
We'll do that, and all the mesh terms have been indexed.
Yes, I know. I knew we couldn't resist answering them. And if you just very quickly go to the last slide, Ian, we'll say goodbye to everyone. So we'll include the link here to our online page so you can find all the training and support materials and our full webinar schedule. So we did mention that we have introduction webinars. So for those of you who joined today and perhaps would like to maybe look a little bit more generally at Embase, or you have colleagues who are new to Embase, then please do promote the Embase webinar on October 23rd far and wide, and we'll indeed include that link when we send you the slides, which we'll do after the webinar. And if you still have some time, we would really appreciate if you fill in the survey at the end so we can continue to improve the webinars and indeed provide the content that you find the most interesting. So thank you all very much for joining today and for all your great questions and your attention, and thanks to Ian for a great presentation.
And thank you all for listening.
Okay, bye-bye.